Why are you ignoring me? I've decided not to engage with strangers. I understand. I'll continue living with my in-laws. They completely ignore me. I expected it from my mother-in-law, but I never imagined my father-in-law would treat me this way. There was a reason why the once kind in-laws had changed. It was because of my sister-in-law, who disliked me. With her return, our peaceful life together was completely upended. Don't regret it, okay? You think I'm going to regret this? Think again, jerk. I packed my bags and left my in-laws' house. Sure enough, just 3 days after I left, chaos broke out in their household. I met my husband at my workplace. He was in sales and frequently visited my office. I was his main contact. As we spent more time in meetings and discussions, I grew fond of him. He was a caring and kind man, tall and not necessarily handsome in the conventional sense, but he exuded a charismatic vibe. He was popular, but for some reason, he said he liked me, and we began dating. When we talked, he mentioned growing up in a typical family with parents and a sister. I lost my parents in an accident when I was young and grew up in an orphanage. It was a complex issue for me, but when we started dating, I quickly shared my background with him. He responded, "That must have been tough, but don't worry, I'll always be there for you." Soon after, he proposed. From the beginning, my husband intended our relationship to head towards marriage and quickly introduced me to his parents. During the introduction, I told them about growing up in the orphanage. They listened attentively and reassured me that it wouldn't matter in our marriage. It made me very happy. Besides, they told me that being raised in an orphanage had nothing to do with being their daughter-in-law, which truly made me happy. Only my sister-in-law, being very attached to her brother, seemed taken aback, asking, "You grew up in an orphanage?" My husband had to reprimand her. In retrospect, she probably disliked me from our first meeting. I didn't give it much thought at that time, thinking we had just met. Before our marriage, my husband and I discussed moving in with his parents. We seriously considered it. But in the end, I decided not to quit my job. It turns out my husband was set to be transferred soon. I thought about quitting my job to move with him, but my career was going well, and I had just been given direct reports. We discussed it and decided he would move on his own after getting married. I wanted to savor that newly feeling for a bit. I even casually thought about visiting my husband during the long weekends for a little vacation feel. The idea of moving in with the in-laws so soon after marriage was a bit daunting, but my husband probably felt more at ease living with his parents. Plus, to put his ever-worried mother at ease, he probably wanted us to live together. Having lost my parents at a young age, I had always yearned for a family, so living with them wasn't an entirely unappealing idea. Plus, my in-laws had always treated me kindly, and I had grown fond of them. Balancing work and my duties as a daughter-in-law was challenging, but having a family made me happy and fulfilled. One day, my father-in-law approached me with an unexpected request. This would mark the beginning of the unraveling of our seemingly happy cohabitation. It was a time when my overly anxious mother-in-law, who tended to act domineering towards my father-in-law, was out shopping. I was about to start cleaning on my day off when my father-in-law asked to speak with me. "What's the matter?" "Well, I don't want my wife to know, but I'm taking a leave from work." A leave. He explained that he had been having problems with his boss and coworkers, and his health had deteriorated to the point where he had no choice but to take a leave. My mother-in-law is a good person, but she's always anxious and a bit neurotic, living with them. I began to notice her neurotic tendencies and how my father-in-law tiptoed around her to avoid upsetting her. He had always been on the slimmer side, but now that I think about it, he did seem to have lost some weight recently. It would be nice if my mother-in-law was the type to genuinely worry about my father-in-law's weight loss. However, when he had previously taken a sick day due to a cold, she remarked, "A cold. All of your colleagues are at executive levels by now. It's because you're always taking days off claiming bad health or colds. That's why you don't get promoted." Rather than showing concern, she was the kind to give him a hard kick in the pants. He probably tried his best to push through, no matter how poor his health was. However, his condition worsened, and he secretly took multiple sick days to visit the hospital. He was both mentally and physically at his limit. With his frequent early departures, tardiness, and absences, there was talk of him possibly taking a temporary leave from work. But my father-in-law didn't want to upset my mother-in-law under any circumstances. If he were to suggest taking a leave of absence, it's obvious that she would explode in anger. Besides, my father-in-law's salary wasn't that great, and he depended on his overtime pay, so taking a leave would mean he'd be making significantly less. If he told my husband, he'd probably end up telling my mother-in-law. So he approached me, asking if I could help with the living expenses. If I suggest taking a leave, she might even divorce me, he said. Hearing those words from him felt like a punch to the gut. I deeply appreciated my in-laws, who had warmly welcomed me without discriminating against my background of being raised in an institution. Determined to be supportive, I made up my mind to help him out during this tough time. Understood. I'll transfer money into your account every month. Please use it for living expenses. I'm truly sorry. I'll do my best to recover quickly and return to work. Thank you so much, he said. After that, my father-in-law pretended to go to work as usual, while I transferred money into his bank account, which he used for living expenses. My mother-in-law, being rather carefree, didn't meticulously check her bank statements or maintain a household ledger, so she never noticed my transfers. Pretending to go to work, he would visit a mental clinic or take walks in the serene mountains. Gradually, his complexion seemed to improve. I thought he might be returning to work soon, but then an unexpected event occurred. After a marital spat, my sister-in-law returned to her parental home. There's nothing like being home. I thought I'd go crazy if I had to stay with that idiot husband of mine. I'll be staying here for a while. Please prepare meals for me too. I was well aware from our first meeting that my sister-in-law didn't like me. During our family's first meeting, my husband was really upset because she was visibly displeased. During the wedding, she maintained a sour expression throughout and even told me point blank, "My brother looks so good, but you? It would have been better if he married someone prettier." She openly looked down on me, raised in an institution, saying it was embarrassing that I didn't have parents to present at the wedding. However, she got married earlier than us and had already moved out, so I thought our interactions would be limited. That's why I thought living with them would be okay. If she had been living at home, I wouldn't have even considered moving in, knowing the daily jibes I would receive. Still, I thought this visit was just temporary due to her marital problems and expected her to leave within a few days. Despite her stern behavior towards my father-in-law, my mother-in-law was never harsh towards me. Even if my sister-in-law had made snide comments, I believed my mother-in-law would have defended me. But I was wrong. One day when I returned from work, something seemed off about my mother-in-law's behavior. Is something wrong? She seemed distant, not engaging in her usual conversation. When I asked, she responded, "Did you know you've been bad-mouthing me behind my back?" "What? I've never said anything bad about you. You've always been kind to me, and I'm truly grateful. Why would I badmouth you? You've been playing the good daughter-in-law card all this time, but you've been bad-mouthing me on the side. Fine, whatever." Saying this, she left the room. In the hallway, my sister-in-law was smirking. "Looks like you've fallen out of favor. Did your true colors show? Being raised in an institution, your background really does show, huh? It's better not to badmouth people, you know." I haven't said anything bad about her. Oh, the neighbors seem to have heard it. After I returned home after such a long time, they told me that you've been constantly criticizing her. What? Who are these neighbors? Look, it's been a while since I got married and moved out, so I've kind of forgotten the names of the neighbors. I've never said any of those things. Stop making things up. Oh my, how rude, Mom. She's calling me a liar and bullying me. Saying this, she entered my mother-in-law's room. After that, my sister-in-law's malicious behavior escalated. She claimed I told her to sleep in the corridor and take the last bath because she's just a lodger. She complained to my mother-in-law about every little thing. Every time, I had to explain that I hadn't said or done any such thing. However, my mother-in-law seemed to be completely taken in by my sister-in-law's words and seemed to be under her influence. My sister-in-law continued her day, making me wonder if she intended to stay indefinitely. With these worries, I headed home with a heavy heart. I'm home. Previously, my mother-in-law would cheerfully greet me with "Welcome back." Now, there was silence. "I'll get dinner ready," I said, stepping into the living room. I was shocked. Normally, my sister-in-law would nag me to prepare dinner quickly, but now my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and sister-in-law were all eating sushi together. Surprised? My sister-in-law said, "Oh, it looks like someone who isn't family is home. You're not thinking of having sushi, are you?" Without even glancing at me, my mother-in-law continued eating while watching TV. "If you wanted sushi, you should have said so." I rushed home after shopping. No one asked for that. "Hey, Mom, Dad, I went out with my friends during the day and got some delicious pudding. Let's eat together." As my sister-in-law said that without paying any mind to me, the three of them started eating the pudding. I was exhausted from work and didn't have the energy to get upset, so I went to my room without eating. The next day, my sister-in-law said she was going out with friends and asked me to drive her to the station. I obviously declined since it was a weekday and I had work. Even if we were headed in the same direction, it would be a completely different route, and she wanted to leave close to noon. There's no way I could take her. "Just take a day off. It's fine. Your cute little sis-in-law just wants a ride." She never had the chance to relax and hang out after she got married, right? Can't you be a bit kinder to her? Now, with all due respect, didn't you go out with friends last night after getting a late-night call? Seems like you've been going out almost every day since you came home. I have work. Please take the bus or train. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were murmuring in the background, but I was fed up. I left for work. However, that night, the defining event that made me decide to leave this house took place. I got held up at work and returned home after picking up some groceries, expecting to be berated. It had started raining by the time I left the office, and it was pouring so hard that even getting in and out of the car, I was drenched. I wondered what nasty trick would be played on me tonight. But when I got home, the three of them were eating takeout just like the day before, no greeting, acting as if they didn't even notice my return. But I've grown used to this treatment. I glanced toward the courtyard from the hallway and saw something placed in the center of the garden. Taking a closer look, it was my belongings. A designer bag I bought with my first paycheck, shoes that were my first birthday gift from my husband, and even my computer that I used for work at home was soaked. As I was in shock, my sister-in-law said with a smirk, "I felt so grossed out having a stranger's things in the house. I threw them out, flaunting a designer bag like that. How arrogant of you." Neither of my in-laws said a word about her outrageous behavior. Why didn't you stop her? Have I done something to you? Do you really believe her lies that I've been bad-mouthing you, bullying her? Aren't you mad at her for what she did? My mother-in-law avoided my gaze, staying silent. Why won't you say anything? I can't talk to strangers. I can't be friendly with someone who's not family. My mother-in-law wouldn't even look at me. My sister-in-law grinned, waiting for my rebuttal. Wait, where's my father-in-law? I'm the one supporting him during his time off. I'm the one helping out with the finances in this house. Sure, I did it out of gratitude, but shouldn't he defend me now? Surely, he'd be on my side. Hoping for support, I looked at him, but he walked past me without a word and went into his room. That was the breaking point for me. I see, I've had enough. Oh, are you mad? I'm sorry. To be honest, I never liked you from the beginning, you know? Being raised in an institution and all. Just don't regret this, like I would, loser. I packed my things and prepared to leave immediately. Seeing me in this state, only my father-in-law seemed flustered since he was the one depending on me financially. Still, he didn't try to stop me or defend me. I was completely done with his apathy. My husband's work assignment was quite far away. but I wanted to leave this house as soon as possible. I quickly got in my car and drove to him. I never once confided in my husband about all this. I doubt my mother-in-law told him about my sister-in-law coming back home. If he had known, he would have contacted me, knowing I don't get along with her. But my husband never mentioned anything about my sister-in-law in his calls or messages. I never felt anything off about my husband's behavior, but perhaps he's being manipulated by her, fed lies about various things. Even now, as I head to him, he might treat me with the same cold attitude as them. My heart was exhausted, feeling so suspicious even towards my husband, whom I trust most. If he's of the same mind and attitude as them, maybe divorce is the only option. That's how deeply distressed I felt. When I arrived at his out-of-state apartment, he hadn't returned yet, perhaps busy since it was the end of the month. As I waited, my husband energetically entered the apartment, maybe having noticed the lights. "What if you were coming? You should have told me. I would have come home earlier." "What a surprise, no, just seeing your face." He immediately greeted me with a radiant smile. The relief of seeing him happy to see me combined with the humiliation from my in-laws' house made a mixture of emotions flood out. And I broke down crying. What happened? Did I say something wrong? Seriously, what's going on? It seemed my husband had no idea about the treatment I received at his parents' house. I composed myself, knowing I had to clearly explain everything to him, and began to recount everything. How I've been financially assisting his father who took medical leave, without telling his wife that his sister had returned and was now staying at their parents' home. That she'd been feeding his mother lies about me, turning her cold towards me, how they referred to me as an outsider, how they ignored me, left my belongings out in the rain and ruined them. Through tears and pauses, I told him everything. Finally, I made it clear that I had no intention of ever returning to that house, and that if he couldn't agree with me on this, I'd want a divorce. My husband apologized for being too engrossed in his work and not checking in on me more often, regretting his family's behavior towards me. Of course, he told me I don't have to go back to his parents' house or even speak to them. Even if I ever forgave them, he was adamant about cutting ties with his parents and sister. He also promised not to provide any financial aid to his father anymore. That night, I felt truly relieved. The tension I had been holding melted away, and I had a peaceful sleep by his side. After that, I never returned to my in-laws' house. While commuting from my husband's out-of-state place was not feasible, I had already approached my company about working remotely. Since my sister-in-law and mother-in-law started treating me harshly, my job doesn't necessarily require being in the office, and many of my colleagues and superiors also work remotely. While I had to visit the office a few times a month, several colleagues lived even further away, so switching to remote work wasn't a problem. I hadn't truly experienced married life since moving in with his family and dealing with my sister-in-law's bullying, but now we could finally live like newlyweds. Just as I was setting up my remote workstation, predictably, my sister-in-law contacted me. It turned out the day after I left their house was the day my father-in-law was supposed to get paid. My mother-in-law usually withdraws a certain amount and transfers it to their household account on payday. But this time she couldn't. Until now, I have been supplementing my father-in-law's reduced salary due to his time off. Upon checking their balance, my mother-in-law confronted him, and he confessed that I had been helping them financially. "Hey, why didn't you tell me you were covering the living expenses?" He told me not to, saying he didn't want you to know, so I kept it a secret. Anyway, we're running out of money for living expenses, and there's no one to cook or do laundry. The room is a mess. As his wife, you need to come back and take care of these things and transfer money quickly. How heartless. I told you, didn't I? I don't regret this. I have no intention of going back to that house or continuing as your maid. Why should I help people who hate me, destroy my belongings, and treat me like this? Aren't you his wife? Without your help, we can't pay the electricity or gas bills. We can't even go shopping. That's why I said it. I'm an outsider, so it's none of my business, right? I hung up, ignoring my sister-in-law's ranting. She and my mother-in-law kept pestering me with calls and messages, but I ignored all of them. Even after my husband returned from work, the persistent calls from them continued. When my husband answered, he told them firmly, "I'll never forgive you for how you treated her, and I'm never sending her back to you. I'm not coming back either. I don't consider you my family anymore. Stay away from my wife, or you'll regret it." Given that my sister-in-law adored her brother, and my mother-in-law heavily relied on him, they were probably in shock. A few days later, I received a call from my father-in-law. He said living with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law was becoming unbearable, and he begged me to continue the financial assistance. I'm still grateful for them accepting me, who grew up in an orphanage when they married. But they didn't support me in my time of need, despite all the financial help I've provided. I don't owe them anything. Why should I help those who joined others in ignoring me? I'll never assist you again. And with that, I ended the call. Later on, my relentless mother-in-law and sister-in-law audaciously showed up at my workplace. Since I was already working remotely and had a bad feeling about them, I'd informed my company about the situation. The security was alerted immediately. Apparently, they caused a scene, demanding that the company force me to send money back home. Upon hearing this, my husband said, "Report them to the police." Colleagues at my company were supportive, saying, "I can't believe you lived with those people. Focus on your remote work with your husband." As for my in-laws, my father-in-law's health deteriorated under the pressure from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, and he'd eventually resigned. My sister-in-law tried to return to her husband's family, but he refused to take her back. The small town quickly caught wind of her drama at my workplace. Given the embarrassment, there was an uproar at her in-laws' place. The original reason for the fight between my sister-in-law and her husband was her affair. This incident added to their issues, leading to an immediate decision to divorce. Without a home, my in-laws and sister-in-law moved to a cheap apartment, managing to get by on part-time jobs. As for my husband and me, we're finally living peaceful days, feeling mentally and physically fulfilled. Recently, we found out we're expecting a child and are overjoyed. We're looking forward to the day we meet our baby, cherishing our time together. My name is Rachel, and currently, I reside in an annex of my in-laws' house with my husband, Stefan. While Stefan lives in the main house with his parents, I am the sole occupant of the annex. Originally, this annex was a small structure built by Stefan's grandfather as a personal project to create a private space. Over time, it has been converted into a living space approximately the size of a room, thanks to my efforts. Initially, Stefan and I lived in a regular apartment for about 3 years after our marriage. However, his parents, who greatly adore him, suddenly expressed their desire to live with Stefan. In response, Stefan, as the dutiful son, declared that he also wanted to be with his parents. Witnessing their emotional reaction, including tears and embraces, I found myself taken aback by the heartfelt scene. Stefan and I first crossed paths at work, where he was my direct subordinate when he joined the company midway through his career. We became a couple after 3 years of dating. Throughout that dating period, he resided at his parents' house. It appears that this prolonged stay fostered a sense of homesickness in both Stefan and his parents. Stefan, who had been pampered at home, seemed to have never been involved in any household chores. After our marriage, when I suggested sharing housework, he appeared reluctant, stating that he had never done any housework before. The problematic aspect was that, despite my intention to divide the chores between us, Stefan seemed to have never considered participating in household tasks himself. I sensed a pattern in all of this. Whenever I attempted to involve him in household chores, Stefan would feign interest for a brief moment, grow disinterested, and eventually say, "This isn't for me. You're better at this, Rachel. You should keep doing it." Both of us were employed, and given my higher position at work, I felt a greater need to share the household responsibilities. However, encouraging him to help often proved to be more time-consuming than handling everything myself. It reached a point where I found it less troublesome to manage everything alone. The dynamics shifted when I transitioned to remote work. Stefan, seemingly surprised to find me at home every day, initially understood the change. He stopped complaining about my altered lifestyle, or so I thought. It became apparent later that he hadn't fully grasped the implications of my decision. Several years into my remote work, Stefan's parents suddenly visited our apartment, expressing a desire to live with him. Witnessing their emotional reunion, I felt a sense of isolation and bewilderment. Eventually, with Stefan's wish to be with his parents, we made the decision to move into their house. Stefan consistently chose locations close to his parents, whether it was for renting an apartment or selecting a job. For me, remote work made the location irrelevant, but his choices required us to uproot ourselves and quit our jobs. Upon settling into his parents' house, Stefan's mother expressed gratitude, saying, "Thank you for taking care of Stefan all this time. From now on, I will take good care of Stefan. Rachel, please take care of everything else." Initially, I interpreted this as a relief from doing housework for Stefan, but soon I realized her intentions were different. My mother-in-law's tasks involved preparing special meals exclusively for Stefan, meticulously laundering only his clothes, ensuring his shoes and belongings stayed immaculate, and purchasing various items specifically for him. As for all other household chores, those for Stefan's parents and myself, including cooking and laundry, were now solely delegated to me despite my ongoing commitment to work. Now, I found myself burdened with the responsibility of not only managing household chores for Stefan's parents and myself, but also maintaining the cleanliness of the larger family house. The prospect left me disheartened. Despite my efforts, this cohabitation seemed to bring happiness only to Stefan and his parents, with no apparent benefits for me. In fact, it felt like my burdens had increased. During one cleaning session, my father-in-law approached me with a request. He looked apologetic as he explained, "Rachel, I have a favor to ask. Could you contribute some money?" Confused, I inquired further. He elaborated, expressing his difficulty in asking Stefan to contribute to household expenses for both of us. Apparently, Stefan had worked hard, and it felt challenging to request financial contributions from him. Stefan and I had previously agreed to share expenses like apartment rent and other living costs. However, Stefan often tried to get me to pay for various items during our shopping trips, including unnecessary ingredients, alcohol, clothes, and accessories. When I resisted, he would act like a child denied a toy, calling me stingy. Despite these financial disagreements, I found comfort in the fact that, apart from these issues, Stefan didn't interfere much with my everyday life. This sense of comfort changed when we started living together, as Stefan's mother began to disrupt my routine. Unlike Stefan, she relentlessly interrupted my work at home, insisting I prioritize household chores. She would barge into my room, pulling on my clothes, making it impossible for me to focus on my work. Frustrated, I discussed the matter with Stefan, anticipating him to take his mother's side. Surprisingly, Stefan listened and promised to talk to his mother. I hoped for a compromise that would consider both our needs. Little did I know that Stefan's idea of a compromise would involve banishing me to the annex, a new, private room. I approached Stefan with a question about the hut, jokingly asking if I could even demolish it and build a new house. To my surprise, he casually replied, "You can even demolish it and build a new house if you want." Taking his words seriously, I promptly began remodeling the hut according to my taste. Engaged in cleaning, renovating, and changing wallpapers, I noticed that Stefan never once showed his face. Despite being married, it became apparent that Stefan had no intention of living in the remodeled hut with me. As I transformed the space, it dawned on me that within the family living trio, I was the only outsider. There were instances when I found myself alone at home, either when they went out to a barbecue restaurant or when I had to work overtime and missed out on shared meals. While these spirited plans were usually concocted by Stefan's mother, it seemed clear that she might have been the driving force behind my exclusion, perhaps hoping I would quickly leave her son. Despite this, Stefan had given me the freedom to do anything with the hut, and I took full advantage of it. Engaging in DIY projects, installing new shelves, and personalizing the space, I made it my own. Interestingly, neither Stefan nor his parents ever visited the hut after I moved out. Although they must have been aware of my renovations, it seemed like I was no longer considered a part of their family, and they had no interest in my activities. Living away from the main house, especially without Stefan's mother around, I began to relish the independence, almost like living alone. I found solace in the fact that staying in the hut prevented her from interfering with my work. Installing new locks and enhancing security during the renovation, I ensured that no one, not even Stefan or his parents, could enter without my knowledge. It led me to reconsider if this new separation wasn't such a bad arrangement after all. However, it seemed my mother-in-law had anticipated my feelings. Unable to tolerate the treatment any longer, I found myself at a crossroads, contemplating my next move. As I settled into the renovated cabin, my mother-in-law's desperation to drive me out became palpable. Her petty harassment started with leaving trash in front of my cabin on garbage day instead of at the collection site. Sometimes, she would host barbecues in the garden without extending an invitation, intentionally wafting the smell of grilled meat towards my cabin. Despite her mild attempts, I couldn't help but smile at her futile efforts to push me away. Then, one day, she summoned me to the main house under the pretense of leftover meat and potatoes. Sensing there was more to it, I went along. Upon arrival, only she was present, and she placed a single piece of paper on the living room table, a divorce paper. It was clear that the real reason she called me was to present this document. If his mother instructed Stefan to submit it, he would do so without hesitation. All that remained was for me to agree, and Stefan and I could be divorced simply by submitting the paper to the city court. With a proud expression, his mother asserted, "Isn't it about time you gave up? There's no reason for you and Stefan to stay married anymore. Get out, you freeloading, unemployed woman." I was taken aback by her audacity, but her certainty in her plan only fueled my determination. Thrilled by the prospect of freedom, I eagerly asked to take the divorce paper, stating, "I'm going to the city court right now. Thank you so much." My mother-in-law, who had likely expected me to resist divorce, was left dumbfounded by my unexpected response. Having submitted the divorce paper at the city court, I wasted no time in packing my belongings. Feeling it was necessary to inform Stefan's mother about the divorce, I headed to the main house and informed her that the process had been successful. Regarding the cabin I renovated, I assured her that I would leave it as is, and she was free to demolish it or use it as she pleased. My positive attitude about leaving surprised even my mother-in-law, who, though seeming happy about my departure, wished me luck as I packed. On the day of my departure, Stefan and his father, seemingly realizing that I was truly leaving, expressed concern, asking, "Are you really going? What will we do without Rachel?" I smiled and thanked them for letting me use the cabin. I explained that since there was no point in being married anymore, and we were now divorced, it was time for me to move on. As I organized my belongings, I completed my move to a luxury apartment, a change I had been arranging for. Not long after settling into my new apartment, my mother-in-law called me awkwardly, saying, "Rachel, I need to ask you something." Cheerfully, I responded, "What's up? How's the cabin I'm using right now?" She then inquired about money, mentioning that Stefan had told her I was giving his father $33,000 a month. Confirming that it was true, I explained that despite her earlier accusation of being an unemployed freeloader, I was indeed working. She seemed surprised, thinking I had quit my job. I clarified that I hadn't quit but left the company to become the president of a new company, setting up a remote work system. Her reaction was one of disbelief, and I sighed, realizing that even Stefan was unaware of my promotion. Considering his attitude since we started living together, it seemed he never truly thought of himself as a husband. When asked about my earnings, including my side job, I nonchalantly mentioned it was roughly around $2 million. I may have exaggerated a bit with the $2 million figure. It's just a hassle to explain the exact figures. With that much money, could you lend us some? Actually, Father was laid off, and he kept it hidden. We've been managing somehow with the $3,000 you've been giving us. Neither Stefan nor I knew about it. It all made sense to me now. My father-in-law's words about it being pitiful to ask his son for money were just a pretense to get me to pay. He probably assumed I had money due to my superior position at our former company, and as a result, sweetly scammed me out of $3,000 a month under the guise of living expenses. In the end, I didn't mind too much since it allowed me to live peacefully in that quiet cabin. Well, I'm divorced from Stefan now, so I don't have any connection with your family, right? When I asserted this, my mother-in-law pleaded, "That's not true. To me and to Stefan, you're still family. Come back to us." I immediately declined, recognizing the potential for being used again. Stepping back into a relationship with Stefan would bring me no benefits. We were now complete strangers, and I found it uncomfortable for them to keep calling me family. Besides, they were the ones who drove me out in the first place. I'm really enjoying my life alone now. It's pretty much the same as when I was married, mostly living alone. The difference is, back then, I didn't spend money on myself, and $3,000 was taken from me every month. I prefer my current life much better. Goodbye, then. I ended the call without hesitation, not understanding why they thought I would return. For my mother-in-law, it must have been a last-ditch effort. In fact, Stefan's salary wasn't that great, and he had a habit of saying, "I can't do it," and passing work to others. This trait, displayed in both our personal life and at the office, left him deemed unreliable, and he remained a regular employee without any salary increase. On top of that, with his father laid off and his mother being a housewife, they couldn't maintain their large house and ended up selling it. Now the three of them are living in the cabin I renovated. While it's just right for one person, it must be quite uncomfortable for three people in that cramped space. Since then, I haven't thought about them and continue to live peacefully.